So when we think about this principle of recovery, essentially what we want to do is, in order for us to maximize performance and fitness benefits, the athlete must recover adequately from that one training stimulus before the next is introduced. So essentially, we want to create the super compensation. And the super compensation is going to allow us to have time to build back up stronger than what we were to start with. And that's what allows us to continue to adapt to exercise. So when we think about recovery, all athletes are going to need different recovery strategies. And again, when we think about which recovery strategies do you use regularly, maybe it's employing good sleep habits, maybe it's good nutritional things, maybe it's using the compression boots, maybe it's ice bath, etc. So again, thinking about what recovery strategies you like personally, that makes a difference. But recovery will be determined by, again, the type of training that you have done, the intensity, the duration, and also the training status, as well as the preference of that individual athlete as well. So we think about recovery strategies as part of the training session. We can use passive and or active recovery. So again, passive means just kind of resting. Active recovery can include something where we're getting our heart rate up and moving through a range of motion, including some stretching as well. We can look at recovery as it relates to fueling with carbohydrates, so replenishment of fuels. So again, if I did something to really deplete my glycogen stores, I did a long endurance event, then it's important to replenish with appropriate carbohydrates. Replenishment of fluids and electrolytes. And again, that would be really important in hot and humid environments, or for individuals that produce a large amount of sweat. Replenishment of protein for repair and muscle adaptation. So again, if we're working with somebody that is doing a lot of strength training, for example, or doing a lot of eccentric tolling work, making sure we're consuming appropriate amounts of protein as part of that repair process. Hydrotherapy, thinking ice baths, or pool sessions. Again, pool sessions are an excellent option for sort of an active recovery day, particularly as we look at these kind of being non-weight bearing, but we can move through a large range of motion. So pool sessions are awesome. Massage, a hypobaric chamber where 100% oxygen is provided us, and this may enhance muscle recovery rate. Again, that's certainly not something that everyone has access to. So again, think like professional athletes being able to have this hypobaric chamber where they have like just a bunch more oxygen available. Again, really the verdict's kind of out if that really does anything personally. Psychological techniques, so thinking progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, breathing techniques, mental imagery, yoga, getting appropriate amounts of sleep. Other ideas for recovery strategies: dry needling, cupping, acupuncture, Theraguns, and the Normatec compression boots, sauna. So all of those are different options for us in terms of recovery. So we think about cool down and how we're using our cool down to kind of help facilitate our recovery. So passive rest is going to help us replenish creatine phosphate storage most rapidly. We talked about the methods and how much time we need in order to kind of replenish creatine. And again, we said 3 to 5 minutes was probably pretty darn good during that passive rest period in order for us to prepare to do another hard round or another hard rep or set with whatever that type of workout is. Stretching can help to prevent DOMS. Static stretching used as part of their cool down can be also beneficial for recovery in terms of kind of helping to clear out some of the waste products. Active recovery, again, if I'm doing active recovery between sets, maybe I'm doing like a light jog, a walk, maybe I'm doing some sort of light body weight squats or something like that if it's in the weight room. The goal is to remove lactate. We can use 1 to 5 minutes of low intensity to maintain oxygen flow to the muscles and maximize the breakdown of lactate. And it's also going to help us to prevent venous pooling. So again, keeping that blood kind of flowing so that we're setting ourselves up for success in subsequent repetitions or sets. Hydrotherapy, so looking at hot versus cold showers. So vasoconstriction of the cold and vasodilation of the hot causes a shunting effect in the blood vessels, which can speed up the removal of metabolites or waste products. So again, being able to manipulate where we send the blood flow has some benefits from a cardiovascular perspective. Pool sessions, as I said, we can use these as part of a recovery session because it's got that reduced stress of the weight-bearing joints. So that's an excellent way for us to get good quality recovery, active recovery, while still getting some sort of cardiovascular and range of motion benefits as well. Cryotherapy, immersion in cold water, such as an ice bath or a cold plunge, can help to reduce swelling caused by soft tissue damage. So again, this might be important for high collision sports where repetitive action causes a lot of muscle microtraumas. So again, this can certainly be beneficial for those types of athletes that are experiencing large amounts of swelling and large amounts of soft tissue damage, either caused by strength training or some sort of collision sport such as football. Massage, isn't this great? I would just, if I could just get a massage every day, that would just be optimal. But massage can be very beneficial for us in recovery. It helps to stimulate an increase in blood flow, which can allow us to improve oxygen delivery to the muscles. It can also help us to remove some of those waste products that we've accumulated during that hard exercise. It helps us to relax the muscle, reduce muscle tightness, and improve joint movement. So again, particularly if we do massage and kind of movement through a range of motion, that can be an effective way for us to facilitate recovery. Can help to break down scar tissue and assist with muscle repair. So again, if we talked about the micro tears associated with the actin and myosin, we want to kind of break down that and kind of get some of those waste elements of those contractile units like that we're going to replace. We need to get those out of the muscle. So we're going to have like macrophages kind of go into that particular area to help kind of eat up some of the waste. So that can be super helpful. And then a massage can help us to relieve swelling as well, which is going to help us to facilitate that recovery. Meditation involves relaxing by controlling the central nervous system and reducing a number of cues to the brain. So again, I think we don't do enough to facilitate sort of psychological recovery as well. And when we think about like burnout in sports, burnout in exercise, this is really important. So being able to kind of reduce those cues, resulting in less stimulation, this can help us to lower our blood pressure, our heart rate, slow our breathing, and also help us to kind of relax our muscles as well. So when you think sound body, sound mind, and the relationship between those two factors, it's a real thing. So thinking about how can we help ourselves to recover and kind of feel rejuvenated from a mental perspective, in addition to some of these methods that are going to help us to recover from a physiological perspective, I think that that's sort of really undersold in the world of recovery. Other things to think about, so compression clothing, particularly compression socks have been pretty popular, particularly like in endurance sports. And the idea here is we're going to accelerate recovery by increasing venous return. So again, speeding up the return of blood back to the heart, reducing exercise-induced muscle damage, accelerating that recovery process, removing lactic acid faster, improving muscle oxygenation, and improving body temperature control. So actually one of the first studies I did when I got to Loras was with Features compression socks, and we did find that with the use of features compression socks. So I had my subjects do 2 trials. So they did a VO2 max test, and then they came back 24 hours later and did a second VO2 max test. And we did 2 like sort of sets of that. So I know this is super mean. So subjects had to do 4 VO2 max tests. We did 1 control trial where they did VO2 max 24 hours later, came back and did a second VO2 max. And then we did another trial with the use of compression socks. So they did a VO2 max. Then they wore the compression socks for 24 hours and came back and did a subsequent VO2 max test. And we found that they had lower lactate levels when they wore the compression socks. They also performed better on their subsequent trial in the 24 hours post than they did in that control trial. So again, we found that the compression socks were super successful in allowing for recovery from these hard endurance training sessions. When we think about nutrition, replenishment of fuels is important. We talked about the metabolic window when we did our sport nutrition unit, but essentially after exercise, we want to refuel with high GI foods within the first 15 to 45 minutes post-exercise. High GI foods are going to be foods that are going to get into our blood supply pretty rapidly. So again, we want to shoot for 50 to 75 grams of carbs. Again, that's not a whole lot. So you're looking at 200 calories. Again, a sandwich, like a peanut butter sandwich and a banana would fill those guidelines, a Cliff Bar and a yogurt. Okay, so again, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of calories in order for us to replenish these fuels. We can consume carbs and proteins together with a 4-to-1 ratio in order to maximize the metabolic window and maximize recovery. Again, this is something that we talked about in our sport nutrition unit, but essentially the combination of both not only helps us to mediate our insulin release, but it's also going to help us by consuming that protein to kick off the recovery process within the muscle cells themselves. When we think about glycogen replenishment, again, doing something as as short as 45 minutes, high intensity is going to cause us to have at least a substantial amount of glycogen depletion. But over the next 2 hours, the athlete should shoot to consume 25 to 50 grams of carbs every 15 minutes in order for us to maintain high insulin levels. After 2 hours, carbohydrate consumption can continue at a rate of 50 grams for every 2 hours for 24 hours. Again, it takes about 24 to 48 hours for us to fully replenish carbohydrates if you have depleted them to a great extent. So thinking like 2 to 3 hours of intense exercise to really cause us to see very substantial depletion of glycogen. So again, when we look at what this means from a post-event perspective, if we take in glycogen or if we take in sugars with a high GI within 1 hour post-exercise, we can see a 55% restoration within the next 5 hours and 100% restoration within 24 hours. Again, if we focus on waiting 1 to 2 hours post event, it's going to take us up to 2 days to recover. And if we wait 5 hours to start our glycogen repair, then it can take us up to 5 days to fully recover from this hard exercise bout from a glycogen replenishment perspective. Sports drinks can be effective for not only helping us to recover from a glycogen perspective, but also as it relates to fluid replenishment and electrolytes as well. Okay, so again, sports drinks contain sodium, which is going to help us with retention of fluid and help us kind of recover in that regard. Again, like I said, this will also aid in that replenishment of glycogen. And it turns out that we should shoot for a carbohydrate content of about 6 to 8% of that fluid in order for us to sort of maximize our GI emptying, so our ability to absorb and utilize those nutrients that we consumed within that given amount of time. This shows you the relationship between a high carbohydrate diet, low carbohydrate diet, and what happens from a training perspective. So let me get my little pointer here. Here you can see your muscle glycogen levels. Okay, and we started with our muscle glycogen pretty darn high. Okay, and here you can see your training session. So training session, training session, training session. So you have 3 different stimuli. We started with our glycogen at 120, and we saw a significant decline, about 50% decline during that first training session. Okay, and with that high carbohydrate diet, I'm able to replenish almost fully within 24 hours. I'm not quite there, but pretty close. Okay, I did another training session. I saw a substantial decline again. And with that high carbohydrate meal, I'm able to almost fully recover before that 3rd training session. Again, if you look at the low carbohydrate diet, notice that the glycogen is just not getting refilled within that 24-hour window, and therefore our subsequent exercise sessions will decrease in quality and put us at a greater risk for injury, in addition to seeing a decrease in performance in these particular trials. As it relates to protein, protein is broken down following intense exercise as well when we think about the muscle damage from those myofibrils perspectives. So think the actin and myosin sort of at that cellular level. So in addition of protein to carbohydrates will amplify our insulin response, which is going to allow us to increase glucose delivery to the depleted cells. Insulin will also stimulate protein synthesis and help us to reduce muscle protein breakdown, which is going to assist with our growth and repair of muscle tissue. And again, maybe you're thinking like, okay, well, that's important if I do strength training, but we also elicit muscle damage when we do anything eccentric. So we can certainly do eccentric actions as part of endurance exercise as well. So certainly it's important for us to consume proteins and carbs as part of our recovery process, regardless of the sport, regardless of the exercise type. As long as I am stimulating muscle, I'm going to facilitate some level of muscle damage if I did something hard. So it's important for me to consume proteins and carbs both in that recovery process. So this is kind of cool. So this shows you the relationship between our control and an exercise muscle. So here you can actually see the muscle damage that we can experience with regular exercise. Here's what a muscle looks like when it is healthy and non-damaged. And here you can see the mass chaos that we experience when we look at the muscle changes when we are facilitating muscle damage through regular exercise. As we mentioned, hydration can also be an important element to consider for our recovery process. So when we think about hydration, we want to assess our fluid requirements. It's important to weigh yourself before and after training to get a feeling for how much fluids I need in order to replenish what I've lost. So for every 1 pound lost, you need at least 16 to 24 ounces of fluid in order to replenish. Again, I don't know, how many sports actually use this. I think probably we use this in hot and humid environments to make sure our athletes are getting enough fluids in. But generally speaking, this isn't necessarily a method that we use a lot of. However, it is something that we could certainly consider if people are struggling with dehydration and struggling to get themselves rehydrated following a hard workout. Again, when we think about dehydration and how this impacts our recovery, this occurs once fluid loss exceeds our fluid intake. And what can happen? We can see a mental breakdown. We see decrease in reaction times, concentration, decision making is impacted. We'll see elevated body temperature, which can lead to issues with body cooling and an increase in blood flow redistribution to the skin, which means we have less blood available to send to the muscles. We'll see a decrease in blood to muscles and a decrease in oxygen available for those muscles, which would cause us to rely more heavily on our lactic acid system, resulting in a higher hydrogen ion accumulation. We also see a thickness or a thickening of our blood as we reduce the amount of fluid that we have in the blood, creating a more viscous blood volume. So the blood's more like a milkshake instead of more like water. And this is going to put more strain on the heart as we try to pump that milkshake, creating more work and more stress on the heart, making that exercise session seem more challenging than what it actually is from a physiological perspective. So dehydration is another factor that's important to consider when we think about some of these recovery methods that we could begin to employ. All right, that's it for today. I hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time.